50 historical pranks that went way too far. People love pranks because they promise a harmless ending, but history is full of jokes that didn't end as jokes. Why do humans keep calling something funny right up until real damage starts? Why does the line always move until someone gets hurt, a crowd panics, or an institution has to clean up the mess? In 1915, a group of British officers released fake reports of enemy landings. As a joke. Coastal defenses mobilized, civilians panicked. In 1938, a radio broadcast meant as entertainment convinced thousands that an alien invasion had begun. People fled their homes, emergency lines collapsed. In the 1960s, a harmless military prank exposed soldiers to real danger. Because no one bothered to explain, it was fake. Each time, the excuse was the same. It was supposed to be funny, it was supposed to end quickly, and it was never supposed to go this far. So why does history keep repeating the same mistake? Why does calling something a prank feel like permission to ignore consequences? Tonight isn't about jokes. It's about 50 historical pranks that went way too far, and the moment nobody wanted to own what happened next. Most pranks begin with the same assumption, that intention matters more than impact. As long as no harm was meant, the outcome can always be reframed. It was a misunderstanding, an overreaction, a joke taken the wrong way. History shows that assumption doesn't hold up very well. What makes these stories different isn't how creative the pranks were. It's how often the people involved lost control of what they started, and how quickly responsibility vanished once consequences appeared. In every case you're about to hear, the action was labeled a prank before it happened. That label wasn't accidental. It was a shield. Calling something a joke lowers expectations. It discourages scrutiny. And when things spiral, it creates distance between the act and its outcome. These aren't urban legends or exaggerated anecdotes. Each example was documented, reported, and treated as legitimate at the time. Some involved governments. Others involved media, workplaces, or institutions trusted by the public. What they share is a moment where someone assumed control they didn't have, over fear, over crowds, over risk. This video isn't interested in judging whether something was funny. That question misses the point. What matters is what happened after the laugh was supposed to end, and how often the damage was treated as an unfortunate side effect instead of a direct result. From this point on, we'll count them, one by one, not as jokes, but as decisions that escaped their creators. 1. In 1910, a group of British elites disguised themselves as foreign dignitaries and toured a Royal Navy battleship as a prank. The visit exposed security weaknesses and humiliated naval command. Newspapers mocked the incident nationwide, turning it into public spectacle. What began as satire forced the Navy to review access procedures and tighten protocols. The joke ended not with laughter, but with institutional embarrassment and lasting changes to military security. 2. In 1938, a U.S. radio broadcast dramatizing an alien invasion aired without clear disclaimers. Many listeners tuned in late and believed it was real. Police stations and newspapers were flooded with calls, and some families fled their homes. Though officials downplayed panic afterward, broadcasting standards were quietly reviewed. The program was framed as entertainment. The public response became a case study in mass media responsibility. 3. In 1957, a British television segment presented a fabricated report on spaghetti being harvested from trees. Viewers contacted the broadcaster asking how to grow their own. While often remembered as harmless, internal discussions followed about public trust in news formats. The prank exposed how easily authority and presentation could override skepticism. The segment ended, the credibility question lingered. 4. In 1962, a university prank involved placing a fake explosive device in a public building as a joke. Authorities evacuated the area and launched an emergency response. Classes were canceled and resources diverted. The perpetrators faced disciplinary action and long-term campus policy changes. What began as student humor became an example used in later safety training. 5. In 1967, a staged UFO sighting using flares appeared near populated areas. Emergency services received multiple distress calls, and air traffic briefly altered routes. Investigators identified the prankers, citing unnecessary risk. The spectacle relied on visual confusion. The response relied on safety systems that couldn't afford doubt. 6. In 1974, a radio station announced a fictional disaster as part of a prank segment. Listeners contacted authorities and relatives, believing it to be real. Regulators reviewed the incident, and the station issued formal apologies. Broadcasting guidelines were reinforced afterward. The intent was shock humor. The cost was public trust. 7. In 1986, a workplace prank involved altering safety signage to confuse colleagues. A worker was injured after following incorrect instructions. Investigations concluded the prank contributed directly. Insurance claims followed, and safety procedures were rewritten. The joke exploited routine behavior. Routine behavior made it dangerous. 8. In 1992, a British television special presented fictional paranormal events as live reporting. Viewers reported panic attacks and distress, overwhelming emergency hotlines. Regulators reviewed broadcasting ethics. The show blurred fiction and reality for effect. The psychological impact outlasted the broadcast. 9. In 2004, a sports rivalry prank altered stadium signage and seating assignments overnight. Security escalated the situation, delaying entry and triggering crowd management protocols. Fans were frustrated and organizers were fined. The prank underestimated scale. Scale dictated the response. 10. In the early 2000s, a staged public social experiment simulated violent behavior for reactions. Bystanders intervened and police were called. Charges followed and platforms reviewed content policies. The prank relied on surprise. Public safety relied on intervention. 11. In 1913, college students released farm animals into academic buildings as a prank, assuming cleanup would be simple. Instead, the animals damaged property, disrupted exams, and forced administrators to suspend classes. Newspapers framed it as youthful humor, but universities responded by tightening access controls and revising campus security policies. What was meant to mock authority temporarily shut it down. 12. In 1949, a European newspaper printed a fake story about a government shortage as an April prank. Readers rushed to... In 1971, a radio host falsely announced the cancellation of a major public event as a prank. Thousands changed travel plans, and organizers scrambled to correct misinformation. Regulators reviewed broadcast conduct. The station issued clarifications. The announcement was playful. The logistical fallout wasn't. In 1983, a prank call falsely reported a bomb threat at a government office. Buildings were evacuated, operations halted, and emergency teams deployed. The caller was traced and prosecuted. Beyond legal consequences, the incident reinforced stricter monitoring of anonymous calls. The prank followed a familiar script. The response followed law. In 1990, a school prank triggered repeated fire alarms during exams. Emergency crews responded each time, diverting resources from other calls. Students faced disciplinary action, and alarm policies were updated. The prank assumed inconvenience. The system treated it as risk. In 1999, an online prank circulated a false celebrity death as humor. News outlets briefly echoed the claim before correction. Public backlash followed, highlighting gaps in verification during early internet reporting. The joke revealed how digital speed could outpace scrutiny. In 2007, a marketing stunt placed unmarked electronic devices in public spaces to simulate interactive art. Authorities interpreted them as potential threats, closing roads and deploying bomb squads. The company paid fines and issued apologies. The campaign assumed curiosity. The city assumed danger. In the 2010s, a viral prank staged a fake kidnapping for online content. Bystanders intervened and contacted police. The creators were detained and charged, and platforms reviewed content moderation policies. The prank depended on realism. So did public response. At this point, it's worth pausing, not to summarize what happened, but to notice what didn't. None of these moments spiraled because people misunderstood the joke afterward. They spiraled because the joke depended on being misunderstood in the first place. Every prank so far borrowed something serious to function: authority, urgency, fear, credibility. Without those elements, nothing would have happened. The prank works only if the system believes it's real, and the system has no incentive to assume otherwise. Emergency services don't wait for context. Institutions don't ask whether panic was intentional. They respond to signals, not explanations. That's the gap most pranksters misjudge, the space between intention and response. Once the signal is sent, control is gone. What's interesting isn't that these pranks went too far. It's that they were designed to go far enough to trigger real reactions while still being labeled as jokes afterward. The label comes later, after resources are spent, after fear spreads, after consequences need to be managed. Calling something a prank doesn't change what it required from everyone else. It only changes who is expected to answer for it. From here on, the scale increases. The settings change, but the mechanism stays the same. The joke ends the moment systems take over, and systems never laugh. In 1926, engineering students suspended a stripped-down automobile atop a university building overnight as a prank. Crowds gathered the next morning, forcing administrators to close surrounding areas for safety checks. Heavy equipment was required to remove the vehicle. The incident led to tighter access controls and restrictions on rooftop entry. The prank aimed for spectacle. The cleanup became the real event. In the 1940s, a staged blackout drill was triggered without notifying nearby neighborhoods, intended as an internal joke among trainees. Residents believed an attack was underway and contacted authorities. Emergency services were overwhelmed before officials clarified the situation. The prank exposed how little margin existed for unofficial realism during periods of heightened fear. In 1959, a newspaper ran a satirical headline announcing a false infrastructure collapse. Readers flooded city offices with reports, and traffic was rerouted unnecessarily. The paper issued a correction, but public officials criticized the lack of restraint. The joke relied on plausibility. Plausibility activated systems designed for real failure. In the 1960s, students planted fake archaeological artifacts on campus as a prank. Faculty announced a discovery before verification, drawing media attention. When exposed, the incident damaged academic credibility and prompted stricter review procedures. The prank worked because authority amplified it faster than skepticism could slow it. 25. In 1978, a radio prank announced a fabricated chemical spill near an industrial zone. Residents evacuated voluntarily, and hospitals prepared for exposure cases. Regulators fined the station, citing public risk. The broadcast assumed listeners would recognize the joke. The response treated it as a warning. 26. In 1989, a workplace prank involved locking exits to simulate an emergency drill. Employees panicked, forcing doors open and causing injuries. Investigators concluded the prank directly contributed. Companies later revised internal safety policies. The joke assumed coordination. Panic replaced it immediately. 27. In the 1990s, a staged surprise inspection prank halted production at a factory. Workers followed emergency protocols, and output losses mounted. Management responded by banning unsanctioned drills. The prank depended on authority signals. Authority carried consequences. 28. In 2001, a fake anthrax warning circulated internally in an office as a joke. Authorities evacuated the building and conducted testing. The individual responsible faced charges, and training on threat reporting was updated. The prank echoed real fears. The system could not ignore them. 29. In 2008, a flash mob prank simulated a sudden fight in a crowded plaza. Bystanders intervened, police arrived, and minor injuries occurred. Organizers were detained. City officials later cited the incident in crowd management reviews. The prank depended on confusion. Confusion escalated faster than intent. 30. In the 2010s, a public transit prank falsely announced service shutdowns via unofficial channels. Commuters rerouted en masse, overwhelming alternate routes. Transport authorities issued emergency clarifications and tightened communication controls. The prank exploited trust. Trust amplified disruption. 3-1. In 1919, factory workers staged a fake machinery malfunction as a prank during a shift change. Supervisors halted production and evacuated the floor, believing an accident was imminent. Operations were delayed for hours, and safety inspectors were called in. Management later cited the incident when updating emergency response procedures. The prank relied on internal trust. Safety protocols took control. 32. In the 1930s, students posted false notices announcing emergency closures at a municipal building as a joke. Citizens queued outside for hours, disrupting public services. City officials issued clarifications and opened an inquiry into misuse of official messaging. The prank exploited authority. Authority amplified inconvenience. 33. In 1944, a staged training prank simulated incoming fire without proper clearance. Nearby units responded defensively, diverting attention from scheduled exercises. Military command disciplined those involved and reinforced communication rules. The prank assumed context would be obvious. Combat training allowed no ambiguity. In the 1950s, a television prank presented a fictional scientific breakthrough as live reporting. Viewers contacted universities and laboratories seeking confirmation. Corrections followed after reputational damage. Broadcasters later tightened standards for satire. The joke borrowed credibility. Credibility multiplied its reach. In 1968, a workplace prank falsely announced mass layoffs. Employees panicked, contacted unions, and halted work. Management intervened to restore order and later banned prank communications entirely. The joke used fear as leverage. Fear reshaped policy. In the 1970s, pranksters staged a fake crime scene for shock value. Passers-by reported it, triggering a police investigation. Charges followed, and the incident was cited in discussions about misuse of emergency services. The spectacle demanded a response. The response treated it as real. In 1981, a school prank altered public address announcements to issue false safety instructions. Students evacuated unnecessarily, and classes were disrupted. Administrators disciplined those involved and restricted access to communication systems. The prank assumed compliance. Compliance caused chaos. In 1994, a radio stunt falsely reported a contaminated water supply as humor. Residents avoided tap water, and health officials responded publicly. The station issued apologies, and regulators reviewed guidelines. The prank disrupted daily routines. The correction arrived after damage. In the early 2000s, a staged art performance involved simulated public distress. Bystanders intervened, emergency services arrived, and organizers faced fines. City authorities later referenced the incident when updating public permit rules. The prank relied on ambiguity. Authorities chose caution. In the 2010s, a fake emergency alert circulated internally at a company as a joke. Employees followed evacuation procedures, halting operations. Management revised communication policies and disciplined those responsible. The prank treated systems lightly. Systems enforced seriousness. By now, the scale has shifted. What began as isolated jokes has turned into repeatable disruption. These pranks no longer rely on surprise alone. They rely on infrastructure. Alarms, announcements, authority symbols, emergency language, the same tools designed to protect people, are used as shortcuts to attention. Once those tools are triggered, the outcome stops being optional. Systems don't evaluate tone, they evaluate risk. What's striking is how predictable the response becomes. Evacuations, investigations, policy updates, disciplinary action. Not because the prank was especially clever, but because the system has no other responsible choice. At this stage, the prank doesn't even need a crowd to go wrong. It only needs credibility. A fake alert sent to the right channel travels faster than correction. A false warning framed correctly creates obligations that can't be ignored. And when the fallout arrives, the explanation is always the same. It wasn't meant to cause harm. It was supposed to be temporary. No one thought it would go that far. But by this point, that excuse sounds familiar. Because the moment realism is used as leverage, distance from consequence disappears. The joke ends as soon as systems respond. What remains is cleanup and a record of how easily seriousness can be activated without ownership. In 1911, engineering students secretly rewired street lamps as a prank, plunging several city blocks into darkness. Police treated it as possible sabotage and increased patrols. Minor traffic accidents were reported before power was restored. City officials later cited the incident when tightening controls over public infrastructure access. The prank aimed for spectacle. The response assumed threat. In the 1920s, a staged ghost sighting prank spread through a rural town via rumor. Residents organized night watches and armed patrols, escalating fear. Local authorities intervened to stop vigilantism and issued public statements. The prank relied on word of mouth. Fear amplified it faster than correction. In 1947, pranksters released weather balloons near an airfield to simulate unidentified objects. Military units scrambled aircraft and opened inquiries. Though later dismissed, the incident prompted stricter reporting protocols. The prank imitated uncertainty. The response treated uncertainty as risk. 44. In the 1950s, a fake press release announced the closure of a major bridge as a joke. Drivers rerouted en masse, causing congestion and accidents. Officials issued emergency corrections and investigated the source. The prank used official language. Trust did the rest. 45. In 1969, a prank staged a mock protest with false demands to observe reactions. Police prepared crowd control measures, and organizers were questioned. The incident later appeared in training discussions on misinformation. The prank borrowed the optics of unrest, the response prepared accordingly. 46. In the 1970s, a television prank simulated a hostage situation without proper clearance. Emergency services mobilized, and the broadcast was halted mid-airing. Regulators imposed sanctions, and networks revised approval processes. The realism was deliberate. The response had no alternative. 47. In 1988, a workplace prank locked staff inside an office floor to simulate a drill. Panic spread, and fire services forced entry. Injuries were reported, and liability claims followed. Companies cited the incident when banning unsanctioned drills. The prank assumed coordination. Panic replaced it. In 1996, a staged chemical leak prank used harmless smoke devices in a public space. Authorities evacuated the area and sealed nearby buildings. Cleanup and investigation costs followed. Safety agencies later referenced the event in emergency preparedness training. The prank relied on visuals. Protocols relied on them too. In 2005, an online prank falsely announced a citywide curfew. Residents altered routines and police issued clarifications. Officials later cited the incident when updating digital alert policies. The prank exploited speed. Confusion scaled with it. In the 2010s, a viral prank staged a fake medical emergency in public to capture reactions. Bystanders intervened, delaying real emergency services elsewhere. The creators faced charges, and platforms reviewed content guidelines. The prank depended on empathy. Empathy activated obligation. By the end, the pattern isn't about pranks at all. It's about control being mistaken for harmlessness. Every prank that went too far shared the same assumption, that intention could cap outcome. That assumption fails the moment realism enters the equation. Fear doesn't check motivation. Authority doesn't wait for context. Systems don't negotiate. Once those elements are triggered, the joke ends, whether the person who started it agrees or not. What disappears next isn't laughter, it's accountability. Consequences are reframed as side effects. Responses are labeled overreactions. Responsibility dissolves into explanation. That's the most consistent part of the pattern. Not escalation, not panic, but distance. Distance between the decision and the damage, between the signal and the cleanup, between the person who started it and everyone who had to deal with it afterward. History doesn't preserve these moments because they're funny. It preserves them because they expose a repeatable blind spot, the belief that labeling something a prank can somehow insulate it from reality. It never does. Looking back, none of these stories failed because people didn't know the risks. They failed because the risks felt abstract, until they weren't. Every prank began with confidence. Confidence that reactions could be predicted, that fear would be temporary, that systems could be nudged without being fully activated. They never were. What history records isn't the joke itself. It records the aftermath, the mobilized responses, the wasted resources, the trust that didn't return to where it started. Calling something a prank didn't soften its impact. It postponed responsibility. Once the moment passed where laughter was expected, accountability arrived late, and usually framed as damage control rather than cause. These events weren't remembered because they were extreme. They were remembered because they revealed how thin the line is between play and obligation. The moment realism is used as leverage, control ends. Systems don't wait for clarification. They don't care about tone. They respond to signals designed for worst-case scenarios, because doing otherwise would be irresponsible. Most people will never stage a fake emergency or broadcast a false threat, but almost everyone recognizes the instinct behind these stories, the urge to push just far enough to feel clever while assuming someone else will absorb the cost if it goes wrong. History keeps correcting that assumption, quietly, consistently, by recording what happened next.